Have you always been a stock detective, Mr. Beige?
No.
What did you do before that?
I was a horse thief. That's why I made such a damn good stock detective. You know, one time I had 400 head of stolen horses in my krills up on 16 Mile River. I'd put them on an electric train there at Ringling, and I'd transfer them over to the Northern Pacific at Modlo and ship them into a 4-state area inside of 48 hours. Why, you know, I could ship a stolen horse faster than you could move an airmail letter. Why, I was the very best.
Why'd you quit?
I got caught.
Rancho Deluxe opened in London yesterday, and so did Konfrontation, which is a far more solemn and earnest piece of work altogether. It's the story of David Frankfurter, a Jewish medical student who in 1936 assassinated Wilhelm Gustloff, the leader of the Swiss Nazi Party, at his home in Davos. It's one of the astonishingly rare examples of the Jews, or in this case a Jew, since David Frankfurter acted entirely alone, striking back against their persecutors. Rolf Lissy's film is more than anything else a study of the assassin's motives, the seeds of which were planted at Frankfurt University early in 1933, when he first became fully aware of what anti-Semitism meant in Germany. Inevitably, I suppose it's a long picture and a somewhat lugubrious one. Well, there can't have been a whole lot for a Jew to laugh about anywhere in Europe in the mid-1930s. Even the Swiss appear to have behaved quite cravenly under Nazi pressure, which is probably one reason why Mr. Frankfurter was sentenced to 18 years imprisonment for what now appears in retrospect to have been an admirably public-spirited act. As a matter of interest, he was released in 1945 and is still alive and well and living in Israel, which indicates that a kind of natural justice is still to be found. The most interesting aspects of the film are the newsreel shots of the Nazis in action, a blood-curdling mob even 40 years later, and the intellectual arguments that went on at the trial. What led to the trial, of course, was this moment, when David Frankfurter, played by Peter Bollag, calls at Gustloff's home with the intention, as he saw it, of avenging the wrongs inflicted on the Jewish people. In the short term, all the Gustloff assassination served to do was to arouse even more berserk hatred of the Jews among the Germans. But of course the broader issue raised by Konfrontation is whether political assassination is ever justifiable or whether it achieves any beneficial result. And now let's move on to more gently lunatic matters. The return of the Pink Panther marks the return of Peter Sellers to the role of Inspector Clouseau, the French detective whom he created with the aid of Blake Edwards, the writer and director, 12 years ago. This is actually the fourth Clouseau movie, Sellers having played the character 3 times, and Alan Arkin having had a shot at it back in 1968 without leaving any lasting impression. The return of the Pink Panther, for some reason which I find hard to understand, looks like being quite the most successful of the 4 films. It cleaned up in America, and Blake Edwards is alleged to be at least $1 million better off as a result, which is very nice for him. Let's all be happy for Blake Edwards. However, fresh from its triumph at the box offices of America, the movie was shown to the European press at Gstaad towards the end of last year, when most of the principals, among them the delectable Schell, were trotted out for our inspection. Peter, where does the character of Clouseau come from? Is it observation, or are you digging about inside yourself to find aspects of him?
No, it's difficult to say about it now because, you know, I've been doing it so long. Come from, I think, you know, when I first did the Pink Panther in Rome years ago, he was just a straightforward French detective. In fact, as a matter of fact, Peter Ustinov was playing the role at that time. And I was going to go into Topkapi with Jules Dassin. I successfully talked my way out of that in an interview at the Dorchester. And Peter left the film because of some problems. We crossed over. He went into Topkapi as the taxi driver, and I went into this. And it worked out great for us both. But getting back to that, let's think now. I don't know. We just decided to make him one of those very serious. I mean, the size of his moustache is to give him, in his own mind, some masculinity, you know? And a very serious but completely hopeless at his job. Very serious detective, but completely bad at it, useless at it, you know?
But he's kind of vaguely etched in, isn't he? We don't really know very much about him, except that he's a detective and he lives with this Japanese whom he keeps fighting.
Yes.
But presumably you know more about him than that in order to portray him.
Well, I know that he goes to this lunatic, let's say, disguisologist who sells him these terrible disguises. He's a very romantic man. He tries very hard with the women, but he obviously doesn't make it with them too much, although he probably will in the next one. He believes sincerely, as I was just saying, that he's probably one of the greatest living detectives in the world. And also, on top of it, the sad thing is that he knows deep down that he isn't. But he doesn't want anyone else to know it, you know.
Inspector?
Do not come in! Do not come in. I am making final delicate adjustments to the pin. I will tell you when it is safe to enter. These adjustments must not be interfered with, you know? Do not come in. I'm just putting my tools away.
Catherine, I noticed throughout the film that in your scenes with Peter, you were breaking up and falling about with mirth. Now, I gather that this must have happened accidentally at first and then became intentional. Is that right?
Well, yes, it happened accidentally because you just can't keep a straight face. And thank God Blake said at the very beginning, because, you know, he knew that there was no way that I was going to be able to keep a serious face. And so he told me, he said, look, if you want to laugh, just go ahead. And so everything was made very easy for me.
But did this sort of thing happen when Peter was extemporizing or when you were doing the actual bit of script which you'd read the night before?
Well, we hardly ever did the actual bit of script that we read the night before because it was all changed on the floor. I mean, all the dialogue has been changed and the movements were changed. And he'd suddenly decide to do something different. I mean, I just put down the script anyway. And, you know, as it is with humor anyway, that when he did something for the first time, you know, one would break up, then he'd do it again, and one would again break up, and then he'd do it again. But after about, you know, the 17th time, you know, then you could keep a straight face.
But you weren't surely used to working like this, were you? Wasn't it rather difficult adapting to that kind of tactic?
Well, not used to it because I've never done a comedy before, but adapting I did very easily, you know, because, I mean, if you're allowed to laugh, and, you know, you find something funny, then I will laugh at anything, you know.
Monsieur Guy Gadebois at your service.
How do you do? I'm Lady Leighton.
Yes, I'm there.
Oh.
I took the liberty of finding out a Björnotov and
That depends on your intentions.
strictly honorable, like an asteroid. A man sees a beautiful chicken, he can't help but be inquisitive, you know? Would you think it naughty of me if I offered to buy you a drink?
But you already have.
How about I buy myself one and we drink it together, huh?
All right.
Waiter, another color and ginger ale, please. Well, if there is a lady, Leighton, there must be a lid.
What?
Leighton.
Oh, yes, he's in
Yes?
plastics.
Oh, the plastic.
In
Yes?
industrial plastics.
Ah, very interesting. Well, here is looking at you, kid.
Blake, in the films, you do a tremendous amount of improvisation, don't you?
Yes.
Isn't this rather dangerous? Because what seems funny when you're doing it spontaneously on the studio floor may not seem funny to an audience later on. How do you gauge how much of that improvisation is worth keeping?
It's difficult. It really is. Fortunately, we've, have a number of precedents to draw from. It's not our first Clouseau, and we know him very, very well, and we have fallen into the trap once or twice. So we try very, very hard not to. Interestingly enough, we fell into the trap more in this one than we ever have before, and it's been a great lesson. I went back for the first time in any film that I've ever done and reshot footage.
It's nice to improvise, you know.
But that must make life difficult for the director, and indeed you do sometimes have a reputation for being a difficult man to work with from a director's point of view.
Well,
Is that fair?
you won't hear that from any good directors. I mean, if you want to go and ask Stanley Kubrick or Blake or the Boltings, some of the people... Anyway, I think anyone who really cares about their work is difficult.
Where does the self-indulgence come from? Is it actors' self-indulgence or directors' self-indulgence, or both that you've got to watch out for?
I think it's both, because we are both so closely united in this character. We know him both of us know him so well that it just takes a little nudge from one of us to encourage the other. It's rather a folie à deux, to use a Freudian expression, where one neurotic encourages the other to greater and greater neurotic dances, and finally we end up waltzing all over the room together.
Well, anyway, what we have to determine at the moment is how good the film is, and I imagine that depends to a large extent on how much you're addicted to the bizarre antics of Inspector Clouseau. The film itself is rather over-plotted, largely, I imagine, to justify the presence in the cast of Christopher Plummer as Sir Charles Lytton, the well-known jewel thief. So the action is divided between the accident-prone efforts of Mr. Sellers to recover the stolen Panther, which, as you may recall, is not an animal but a diamond, and the less hilarious attempts of Mr. Plummer to try to prove that he didn't steal it. Essentially, of course, the film revolves around the comedy set pieces, most of which work pretty well, though even the best of them show signs of that aforementioned self-indulgence on the part of both director and star, and go on to the point at which you realise that you're still wearing your grin even though you don't actually have any further use for it. It's an amiable enough romp, but not as funny, I think, as the box office receipts from America would seem to indicate. Still, let's have a bit of plot. Clouseau has followed Sir Charles Lytton's wife, played by Schell, who, as I think I may have mentioned before, is rather delicious, to the Palace Hotel in Gstaad, and there, disguised as a cleaner, he decides to search her room in his quest for the missing Panther. Well, next week a different kind of comedy opens in London in the shape of The Sunshine Boys, the screen version of a play by the prolific and extremely funny Neil Simon. Well, you know what I mean about Neil Simon if you saw The Odd Couple on television a week or two ago. The Sunshine Boys stars Walter Matthau and George Burns and is directed by Herbert Ross. And here indeed is Herbert Ross to explain what it's all about.
The Sunshine Boys is about two very famous comedians called Lewis and Clark, and it's They're based, in fact, on a vaudeville team called Smith and Dale. And they had a series of sketches, the Dr. Cronkite sketch, the Jewish pastrami sketch, the gypsy sketch, the chiropractor sketch, etc. And they were legendary act, because they never changed their act in 40 years, and they were together for over 50 years. And in the play, they have broken up their team, and one of them, Walter, still is anxious to work but can't get work, and the other man has retired. And Walter blames George for the dissolution of the act and not realizing that there is no vaudeville and that there is no place for that kind of act to play. And it's about their quarrels and ultimately their rapprochement making up, and they end, ironically, together in the old actors' home in New Jersey.
Well, now, Walter Matthau needs no introduction, as they say, which is what people usually say when they can't think of anything else. But in Mathau's case, it happens to be true. In my opinion, if you should be remotely interested in my opinion, he's self-evidently one of the best actors in the cinema today. George Burns, on the other hand, may need a certain amount of introduction. He's not exactly a young unknown, but he hasn't made a film since 1939. So in this country, he's probably best known for the Burns and Allen show on TV in the 1950s.
I'd love to straighten Gracie out, but I can't. If she ever got anything straight, I'd get so mixed up that I'd have to get a fellow with the biggest cigar to straighten us both out. You heard of instant milk and instant coffee? Well, I'm putting a new product on the market called Instant Confusion. You take any situation, you add a little Gracie, and there you are. And if you know where you are, you haven't taken enough. I'll never forget, on my 40th birthday, Gracie told everybody I was 60, and I asked her why, and she says it's very flattering to have people think that you're 60 because you look at least 5 or 6 years younger. I've been spending the rest of my life trying to catch up to my age. I passed it twice.
George Burns 20 years ago, and he wasn't exactly a beardless youth then. As a matter of fact, he'll be 80 this year. By comparison, Mr. Matthau, his co-star, is a mere stripling of 55. How then did they get along together?
They got along very, very well together, and then we did a number of very careful makeup tests, sort of so that Walter, and then comparing Walter and George together. And then the trick was, we never let Walter come on the set unless he was in his carpet slippers and his pajamas, and that slowed him up, you see. And then he, as the weeks went on, he just became the character, and they got along terrifically.
Knock, knock, knock. Enter! What do you mean, enter? What happened to come in?
I'm trying to freshen up the act. Sit down. Now for my records. What's your name?
Kornheiser.
And your first name?
Sylvia.
Sylvia Kornheiser? Isn't that a funny name for a man?
That's what my wife Herman says.
I see. Well, Sylvia, the first thing I'm going to have to do is examine you. Take off your clothes.
Nothing doing.
You're not going to take off your clothes?
Not with a name like Sylvia.
Well, I haven't seen the Sunshine Boys yet, so any opinion I deliver on it now is necessarily second-hand. The most notable second-hand opinion that's come my way is that of the American film critics, who seem generally to agree that the casting of Matthau and Burns is more or less ideal. Indeed, when I was in Hollywood just before Christmas, George Burns was a hot tip for an Oscar nomination, which adds a certain piquancy to the fact that he was not, according to Herbert Ross, originally chosen for the part at all.
Well, actually, the original casting was going to be Walter Matthau and Jack Benny, and shortly before we began to shoot, Jack died. And I had always wanted to read George, and the irony was that when we were casting it, George had open-heart surgery and was too ill to read for the part. And then Jack became ill and died. And we rang George up and said, well, would you come and read? And he said, well, I've never auditioned in my whole life, but okay. And he came to my house, and Walter was there, and Neil. And he read through the entire script, and it was the most brilliant reading I've ever known an actor to give, because he did not miss one point in the script. And then we persuaded, everybody was terribly nervous, persuaded the studio to go with him, and I refused to test him because I thought it would make him nervous, actually, and I believed that he could do it. And then we began to rehearse, and on the third day of rehearsal, he had memorized the entire script and never went up once. He knew 45 pages of dialogue by heart.
How about you?
Thank God. Knock wood. Perfect.
I heard different. I heard your blood didn't circulate.
Not true. My blood circulates. I'm not saying everywhere, but it circulates.
I've been lucky. I'm in the pink.
I was looking. For a minute, I thought you were having a hot flush.
You know, Saul Burton died.
Go on. Who's Sal Burton?
You don't remember Saul Burton?
Oh, yes, the manager of the Belasco Theater.
That was Saul Bernstein.
Not Sal Bernstein. Sal Burton was the manager of the Belasco Theater.
Saul Bernstein was the manager of the Belasco Theater, and it wasn't the Belasco Theater, it was the Morosco Theater.
Sid Weinstein was the manager of the Morosco. Sal Burton was the manager of the Belasco. Sal Bernstein, I don't know who the hell was.
How can you remember anything if your blood don't circulate?
It circulates in my head. Doesn't circulate in my feet.
Is anything coming down?
Wait a minute, wasn't Sid Weinstein that lousy songwriter who wrote Lady, Lady, Be My Baby?
That's Saul Burton.
Oh, that's Sal Burton. He died?
Last week.
Where?
In Variety.
I thought it might be amusing, if not necessarily instructive, to round off this preview of the Sunshine Boys with brief samples of the personal humour of both Walter Matthau and George Burns. So, here are a couple of jokes delivered by them at a recent celebration in their honour in America.
Got a telegram from my wife. She had another baby. I'm as happy as if the kid were my own.
And we played the Fantasia circuit. And we're on the bill with the Cromwell sisters. Very pretty girls, they were contortionists. And I went around with Lily Cromwell. And that girl could take both of her legs and wrap them around her neck. And she did some good stuff on the stage, too.
And that's more or less all for now. I'll be reviewing the Sunshine Boys and the rest of the week's new films next Friday, when we'll also have an interview with Marisa Berenson, who stars with Ryan O'Neill in Barry Lyndon. Let's round off this evening's programme with a look at George Formby, the subject of this new biography. Depending on which critic you read, Formby looked like a horse, a cow, a carp or a turnip. He made a fortune from films and records, but for most of his life was limited to 5 shillings a day pocket money by a somewhat domineering wife. And of course he sang decidedly saucy songs about, among other things, his little stick of Blackpool rock. I'm sure I can't think what he meant by that. Anyway, he made 20 pictures, among the earliest of which was this one, No Limit, in 1935. So here's a pleasant touch of nostalgia as we plunge on into the unknown perils of 1976. Good night.
Well, there's nothing to say except there was a lot of luck. I had one bit of a do with the fellow.
No. Say, I owe everything.
I owe everything. You owe me £50. Shut up.
Not now.
It's all right, Mother.
Just
kissing his mother.
I owe everything to my boss, Mr. Higgins.
I owe everything to my boss, Mr. Higgins.
Who has given me an agency.
Who's given me an agency. I didn't know that.
Nor did I, but you'll have the agency, my lad.
There's nothing more to say now except...
I love you.
I love you. You mean me?
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
mustn't shout, boy.
Let me see you play cards with this boy.
But he's a common laboring boy.
What of it? You can break his heart.
Beg pardon, Mum?
I said you should play a game of broken hearts.
I'm afraid I don't know that, Mum.
Stella will teach you.
Good evening. That was part of the umpteenth remake of Great Expectations, Margaret Leighton's last film, and a film that would have been a musical if only they hadn't left out the music. Well, I'll explain that later on. Meanwhile, let me tell you that also in tonight's programme we have The Bawdy Adventures of Tom Jones, which is both a sort of remake and a sort of musical, a brief look at the so far brief career of Marisa Berenson, and a review of The Sunshine Boys. But let's get underway with the third remake of the week, And Then There Were None, which is a new version of the 1966 film 10 Little Indians, which itself was a remake of the 1945 screen version of Agatha Christie's mystery novel, originally called 10 Little Niggers. But that, of course, was before it was decided that Indians were less sensitive about such things. And indeed, before we reach the present, less prejudiced age, when, thank goodness, only another black man would, as it were, dare to call a spade a nigger. However, the basic plot of book and films remains much the same as ever, except that in the remake it all takes place in Iran, or more precisely in a luxurious but empty hotel in the middle of an oasis in the middle of nowhere. The 10 oddly assorted guests invited there by the mysterious Mr. Owen are gathered in the lobby, speculating idly on the reason for the party when a tape recorder reveals all.
This is your host speaking. My name is U.N. Owen. I've brought you here to charge you with the following crimes. General Andre Salve, Croix de Guerre, that you achieved honor from dishonor and sent 5 men to their certain death. Ilona Margon, actress, that you did bring about the death of your husband in a most cold-blooded and ruthless manner. This is your host speaking. My name is U.N. Owen. I've brought you here to charge you with the following crimes. General Andre Salve, Croix de Guerre, that you achieved honor from dishonor and sent 5 men to their certain death. Ilona Margon, actress, that you did bring about the death of your husband in a most cold-blooded and ruthless manner. Dr. Edward Armstrong, that you did kill Mrs. Ivy Benson and betray your sacred trust. Michel Ravin, entertainer, that you are guilty of the murder of William and Liza Stern, whose bodies, when they were found, were almost unrecognizable. Vera Clyde, secretary, that you murdered your sister's fiancé, Richard Barclay, by slow, deliberate poison. Hugh Lombard, that you were guilty of the death of Jennifer Hayes, who was to bear your child.
And so the crimes of all 10 are revealed, and one by one they're bumped off by the unknown Mr. Owen. The first to go is Charles Aznavour, who sings a very banal song and suffers a swift and terrible retribution when he's promptly poisoned, which serves him right. It's a sort of United Nations package deal movie with actors, and I've little doubt money, from Britain, Germany, Italy, France and Spain. And it's written and directed in such a pedestrian manner that I imagine it'll be of equally slight interest in any of those countries. It lacks tension, excitement and humour, and represents a pretty poor testimonial to Dame Agatha in the week she died. Dickie Attenborough, or begging his pardon, Sir Richard Attenborough, as the judge and Herbert Lom as the doctor are comfortably the best of the cast. As for the others, well, Stefan Oldran looks delicious but doesn't actually do much apart from getting bitten by a snake. Oliver Reed, who's beginning to look more like Oliver Hardy these days, plays the juvenile lead with a belligerent jut of the paunch. And the sturdy Elke Sommer, who seems redoubtable enough to go 15 rounds with any number of mysterious murderers, is called upon to scream a lot, which he does very loudly and briskly. It's a dull and mechanical film in which anticlimax follows anticlimax from start to finish. One of the later anticlimaxes, which leads eventually to the denouement, is preceded by this scene in which Mr. Reed and Miss Sommer persuade each other of their innocence.
Vera.
Yes.
This man you were supposed to have killed.
I told you the truth.
Well, maybe he was never really killed.
Yes, he was.
Well, maybe he never existed.
Yes, he existed. He was my sister's fiancé.
Well, then who killed him?
My sister.
And you were accused.
Well, I covered up for her and... Well, if that's a crime, then I suppose I'm guilty, but...
Where's your sister now?
She killed herself.
My poor baby.
Well, the last time that story was filmed was in 1966 with Leo Genn, Wilfrid Hyde-White and Dennis Price in the cast. But the original version was directed by René Clair in 1945 and was incomparably the best of the three. As a matter of interest, it was actually called 10 Little Niggers at first, but in the 1950s the title was changed to the less inflammatory 10 Little Indians, though I don't suppose Indians, either red or brown, were all that chuffed about it. Still, here now is a scene from the 1945 picture in which I dare say you'll recognise, among others, Misha Auer, Lewis Hayward, Barry Fitzgerald and Walter Houston.
Listen, my friends. The accusation is true. Now I remember. A year ago, two people in the road. I was driving fast.
What happened?
They took my license away.
What about the two people?
I ran over them. Beastly bad luck.
I'm still not clear as to the purpose of our unknown host in getting us to assemble here.
In my opinion, this person, whoever he may be, is not of normal mind. He may be dangerous.
I think it would be well for us all to leave this island immediately.
I quite agree, sir. Rogers, how soon can we get the boat from the mainland?
I can't, sir. There's no telephone. The boat only comes twice a week, sir. It won't come again till Monday.
And this is only Friday. You've no boat here?
No, sir.
Why do you want to leave, my friends? Why don't we get to the bottom of this mystery? It's wonderful. Really?
Our time of life, sir, we've no desire for thrills, as you call them.
Your legal mind has lost its taste for adventure. I am all for crime, Your Honor. May I propose a toast? Here is to crime.
Perfectly disgusting.
And so on to our next remake, The Bawdy Adventures of Tom Jones, which is Jeremy Lloyd's screen version of Paul Macpherson's stage version of Henry Fielding's novel, and is in no way to be confused with John Osborne's and Tony Richardson's 1963 production of the same book, starring Albert Finney. This present version is so far removed from Fielding's work that it has little to do with Tom Jones, and isn't very bawdy either, since bawdiness here usually takes the form of somebody hoisting a serving wench's skirt, so that her bottom may beam at the camera. Well, bottoms are either apples or pears, and what I say is that when you've seen one of each, you've seen them all. But along with bottoms, we also have a few songs, and to give you some idea of the kind of songs they are, let me quote you two lines from a little ditty sung by Tom Jones himself. I may have been born the wrong side of the sheet, but they'll never make a wet blanket out of me. Yes, Right. Well, Nicky Henson plays the illegitimate Tom, who is adopted by Squire Allworthy and gets into all manner of not very bawdy scrapes before finally living happily and not at all bawdily ever after. Trevor Howard is the bucolic and irascible Squire Weston, and a very respectable cast also includes Terry Thomas and Arthur Lowe, Georgia Brown, and Joan Collins, who in an early exhibition of Women's Lib plays a highway person called Black Bess. And if that was the Black Bess who accompanied Dick Turpin to York, I'm not surprised it took him so long to get there, or that he seems to have felt obliged to stop and sleep at every town and village en route. Still, that's by the way. Back to Tom Jones and his misadventures as he goes courting Squire Weston's daughter, as portrayed by Madeline Smith.
Like children playing games, we play our music. We've made the sweetest sounds each time we met. Butterfly wings waltz round our kisses, while whispering willows bow a minuet. And now the cynics with their schemes are trampling over all our dreams. There's a love song in tatters at my feet. But I'll make the music play for you again. I'll harmonize your melody. I'll make our song as good as new again. For I'll not be content with memories.
What is it?
It's a flower.
It's beautiful.
The bawdy adventures of Tom Jones is showing now in the West End, and so too is Great Expectations. Well, as I said, Tom Jones is a musical in that it includes a few musical numbers. And in the early planning stages, Great Expectations was apparently going to be a musical too. I don't know whether the music was abandoned before or after it was written, and therefore I can't say whether we should be grateful for its absence. Though on the whole, I feel that the lack of contemporary songs in any screen version of Dickens is at least a small mercy. Anyway, what we have here is a straight version of the story, which looks as though it were made for American TV and compares most unfavourably with David Lean's superb 1947 version. It's very earnest and worthy and plodding, and it won a script prize at the Moscow Film Festival last year. Well, the script is by a gentleman called Sherman Yellen, and at the beginning, I must say, I thought we were in for an entirely new interpretation of the work, because Pip as a little boy is played by a little boy, and the love of his life, Estella, as a little girl, is played by Sarah Miles. Since this means that young Pip is about 12 and young Estella is at least 30, this throws a devastating new light on his infatuation for her. Not just a boy and girl affair, but a sort of Oedipus complex. But alas, this novel theory is never developed. Pip grows up to be Michael York, and Estella continues to grow up to be Sarah Miles, and the plot trudges grimly along its predetermined course, in which, as you'll recall, the fate of the eccentric Miss Havisham and the sinister escaped convict Magwitch are all tied up with Pip's mysterious Great Expectations. Joseph Hardy directs with no feeling whatsoever for Dickensian or even Victorian England, and despite a cast that includes James Mason as Magwitch, the late Margaret Leighton as Miss Havisham, and Robert Morley as Pumblechook, the performances are fairly perfunctory. One exception to this is Anthony Quayle, who lends a certain conviction to the role of Jaggers the lawyer, and the odd word of praise is due to Joss Ackland as Joe Gargery. Here now, though, is Mr. Quayle, breaking the news to Pip of his Great Expectations.
Pip, we have a visitor. He just knocked, asked if you were here, and waited.
Joseph Gargery. My name is Jaggers. I'm a lawyer in London. I'm pretty well known. I wish to have a private conference with you two.
I keep no secrets from my wife, sir.
Very foolhardy principle, Joseph Gargery. But I'm not here to teach you sense. I'm the bearer of an offer to relieve you of this young fellow, your apprentice. You would not object to cancel his indentures for his good? You would want nothing for so doing?
Lord forbid that I should want anything for not standing in Pip's way.
The communication I've got to make is that this young fellow has great expectations. I'm instructed to communicate to him that he will come into a handsome property. Further, that it is the desire of his benefactor that he be immediately removed from this place and be brought up as a gentleman.
Well, the sad thing about Great Expectations, of course, is that it's the last opportunity we shall have of seeing the splendid Margaret Leighton. The best film of the week, without any argument at all, is The Sunshine Boys, in which Walter Matthau and George Burns play a pair of geriatric vaudeville comedians who are reunited after an 11-year retirement for a TV spectacular. Of course, it all goes catastrophically wrong because they hate each other and have done so for the last 50 years. What do you mean it's all settled, says Burns, after Matthau triumphantly claims to have scored a verbal point. All you got is an apology that I didn't offer and you didn't accept. Another time, when Richard Benjamin, as Mathau's agent and nephew, reveals that he's sending his uncle to the old actors' home, Matthau remarks bitterly, "The old actors' home, that's the first booking you got me in 10 years. The script, of course, is by Neil Simon and is therefore full of the kind of sharp, one-line New York Jewish wisecracks that I find irresistible. Mathau's gloriously manic and apoplectic, and Burns, giving a superb performance for an octogenarian who hadn't made a film in 36 years, is the perfect foil, being quite dignified and, as always, the complete master of comic timing. Richard Benjamin's obviously overshadowed by this knockabout turn, but there's nothing wrong with his performance either. However, let's have a look now at Walter Matthau. He's worked himself up into a heart attack, and here we find him in bed and goading the nurse who's been hired to look after him.
What'd you do that for?
You owe me $40.
For what?
That's what you get for watching me sleep. Why shouldn't I get the same money?
Woke up a little grouchy today, didn't we?
We did? When did you get sick? What's this? What? Don't flub up the pillows. It takes me the whole night to get them the way I like them, and then you flub them the hell up.
Keep it up. You just keep it up, Mr. Clark, and we're going to have ourselves another heart attack.
Again, my partner?
And stop throwing your papers on the floor. I get paid for nursing, not spending.
Tell me something. How old is a woman like you?
It's none of your business.
I'm not asking for business.
54.
You married?
My husband passed away 4 years ago.
Oh. You were the nurse?
No, I was not the nurse.
Hey, don't make up the bed. I'm still sleeping in it. Don't make up a bed where the person's still in it.
Hey, Uncle Willie. Hi, Odessa. How are you?
Hello, Mr. Ben.
You look terrific.
You got my variety?
Yeah, and about 150 get-well cards from people all over the country. Telegrams from Milton Berle, Lucille Ball, Bob Hope, every comic in show business.
What about a commercial? Did you speak to the Alka-Seltzer people?
Talk about that later.
I'm going to lunch. If he needs his pill, it's on the bureau. And don't get up and go to the bathroom. Use the you-know-what.
And if not, I'll go you-know-where.
Have a good lunch.
Thank you.
Stanley Kubrick says he chose Marisa Berenson for the role of the widowed Countess in Barry Lyndon because there's a sort of tragic sense about her. Ryan O'Neill, her co-star, was rather less chivalrous. Somewhat bitterly, he described her as overbred, vacuous, giggly and lazy. Later on, he thought she might be nominated for an Oscar, an unlikely event if you ask me, but O'Neill even spoilt that modest tribute by adding she's just being herself. Still, let's ignore all this catty infighting. Here's Marisa Berenson talking about what it's like to work for Kubrick.
It's just a question of a different personality, really. You know, I mean, everybody has a different personality. Stanley just has a very strong personality. He's a perfectionist, but then Bob Fosse was a perfectionist too, and so is Visconti. So it's just a question of different, you know, ways of doing things. I mean, he, from beginning to end, is in every department, and he is, you know, sees that everything is done just the way he wants it.
So much for Berenson on Kubrick. Now here's Berenson on Barry Lyndon.
Well, I play this very rich lady, an 18th century lady, who was sort of one of the richest women in England and Ireland at the time, and who was a countess, and she was a very lonely, unhappy woman, unfulfilled, I think, as far as love is concerned, and sort of very intellectual, religious, very melancholic. And then she sort of meets this man in the film, you know, who she falls madly in love with, and all of a sudden finds a certain fulfillment, which is to be destroyed after, you know. But she finally discovers what love is, you know, and also, I think, physical fulfillment. But then she ends up very unhappy. She's, you know, he destroys her, uses her.
Lady Lyndon tended to a melancholy and maudlin temper, and left alone by her husband, was rarely happy or in good humor. Now she must add jealousy to her other complaints, and find rivals even among her maids.
Somewhat surprisingly, you might think Marisa Berenson sees a similarity between Lady Lyndon and the part she played in Cabaret.
In Cabaret, I played a Jewish, German, also rich girl from a very good family, you know, but she was also not fulfilled, and also, actually, it's not so different, in fact. It was just a different period, and she was, but actually, they're not too far apart in the way that they were both women who were sort of cold in a way, not cold, but who had never been really sort of, had never blossomed out in the way of emotions and love and all that.
All healthy, I hope.
Yes. Yes.
I've had a cold. You are all healthy, I hope.
Yes. Yes.
I've had a cold, but it is better now.
Good. How sad. A cold from the nose is most aggravating.
This was a cold of the bosom, not of the nose.
Oh.
All the phlegm was here.
All the what?
The phlegm that comes in the tubes.
I think I'm gonna be sick.
Phlegm. PH is always pronounced as F, and you don't sound the G.
Then why are they putting the G, please?
Well, that's a very good question, but rather difficult to explain.
Try, Brian.
Well, It's just there.
So, Mr. Professor, you do not know?
No.
Then I'm sorry. I cannot help you.
It's most amusing. Very amusing.
Herein. Oh, how thoughtful of you, Fräulein Schneider. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome, Herr Robert. Gnädiges Fräulein.
Please. Please. You must take a cake, dearest miss.
I'm not eating between meals.
You're not eating between meals.
I am eating between meals. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Oh, Bri, Liebling, did I tell you? I saw a film the other day about syphilis. Oh, it was too awful. I couldn't let a man touch me for a week.
Coffee?
Is it true you can get it from kissing?
Oh, yes. And your king, Henry VIII, caught it from letting Cardinal Wolsey whisper in his ear.
That is not, I think, founded in fact. But from kissing, most decidedly. And from towels, and from cups.
And, of course, screwing.
Screwing, please?
Oh, fornication.
Fornication?
Oh, right. Darling, what is the German word?
I don't remember.
Oh, yes.
Oh, no.
Bumsen.
Oh.
That would be the one German word you pronounce perfectly.
Well, I ought to. I spent the entire afternoon boomsoming like mad with some ghastly old producer who promised to give me a contract. Gin, Miss Landauer?
So then, the success story of Marisa Berenson, with its heartwarming reassurance that being rich is not an insuperable handicap so long as you keep on trying. The story of Sam Peckinpah is a bit different. I expect he's quite rich now, but I don't think he was when he started out in life. He was born in California 50 years ago of mixed pioneer and Red Indian stock, and in the last 10 years he's become quite notorious as the maker of such violent pictures as Straw Dogs and Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. Straw Dogs, a tale of lust, rape and murder in Cornwall of all places, was something of a cause célèbre 4 or 5 years ago when some of the film critics reacted as though they'd been violently goosed by it. Well, now it's on release again in a double bill with Ralph Nelson's equally violent Soldier Blue, and nobody seems to have raised a murmur. Perhaps our sensitivity to screen violence has been blunted in the meantime. However, this is clearly Peckinpah's month, because The Wild Bunch, which gave him his first big commercial success in 1969, has also been re-released, and tomorrow there's an all-night Peckinpah programme at the National Film Theatre, when people with sufficient stamina will be able to see his 4 westerns: Deadly Companions, Guns in the Afternoon, The Wild Bunch and Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Of these, I think the best is undoubtedly Guns in the Afternoon, made in 1961, in which Joel McRae and Randolph Scott play a couple of elderly gunmen, the Western equivalents, I suppose, of Matthau and Burns in The Sunshine Boys. They team up together to bring back the gold from a mining town on behalf of some bankers, and in this scene they're on their way to their assignment, reminiscing about the good old days.